Hi there, welcome to another Q&A with Mike. Today we have a few questions to go through, and the first two, which I can combine actually, are by Fernley, who says, what's acceptable when it comes to making changes to a vintage instrument, e.g. frets? And also the Desperados UK says, when should you be thinking that a vintage guitar needs new frets, and what impact does that have on the value? He also says, or he also asks, neck headstock repairs, what to look out for, what to buy and what to avoid. So, both very good questions. Let's deal with the general issue of frets and what changes make a difference to vintage instruments. Generally speaking, if you refret a vintage instrument, a guitar, or any instrument which has frets, then unless it's a dead mint under the bed find in absolutely perfect condition, it's not going to make a huge difference to the value of it. Some people say it's like changing tyres on a car. It's something which wears out on an instrument if it's going to be used. And most of the instruments we come across have been used at some point in their life to a greater or lesser degree, and the first thing which will wear out is inevitably going to be the frets. So the question is, do you want a guitar that is all original but plays like a dog, or would you prefer a guitar which is a good player and has the frets changed? And a lot of players, a lot of customers we sell to would actually prefer a guitar they can actually use. So if the frets are really, really worn, then I wouldn't have any qualms about changing them if it's a guitar which has previously been used. The exceptions to this are guitars which have been pretty much never used in their life and have been stored under the bed or in a museum or somewhere like that for most of their life. With these, I wouldn't change a thing at all. And in fact, we had a couple of years ago a 1964 Lake Placid Blue Strat, which we'd got from the original owner, who was an electrician. And he bought it in '64, played it for a couple of years, and he then put it up in his loft in 1968, I think he said, and he never used it until he sold it to us a couple of years ago. And it had what we believe were the original strings on it, which had turned black. One string had broken, so it was a 5-string guitar. The original frets on there, which did have a bit of wear, so he obviously hammered it for a few months, and they were totally green in colour. The rest of the guitar was in a pretty bad state, but it was all original. It was as the guy left it when he last played it. Now, when we get something like this, it raises interesting questions. Do we sell it to a collector who appreciates its rarity in that it's totally as it was back in the 60s, or do we refurbish it and turn it into a player? It is a question which we were pondering for quite some time, and I actually asked Joe Bonamassa about this because I know he has had a few guitars, and he sort of confirmed our suspicions that we should basically leave it in the state that we found it, with covered in grime, black strings, green frets, and just keep it as pretty much something which you couldn't play. So we did that, and it took a while to sell. It eventually did sell, and the person we sold it to, first thing he did was to polish it up, change the strings, and polish up the frets. So it was a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. However, I hope that sort of answers your question. Don't be afraid to change the frets if it's a guitar which has been previously played. Be wary of changing the frets if it's a guitar which is in absolutely pristine condition. If we had a guitar through here which had been played, like most of the ones we do have, and the frets have been changed, it would maybe devalue it a tiny bit by a few £100, possibly, or not even that. It's something which is expected to happen in an instrument's lifetime, and collectors find it acceptable, and we find it acceptable, and players will actually quite like it. Now, the last thing I need to point out with this is, if you are going to refret a vintage instrument, try to do it sympathetically to the original design of the instrument. I.e., if you have a vintage telly or a vintage Strat and you feel the need to change the if you have a vintage telly or a vintage Strat and you feel the need to change the frets, please do not put great big railway sleeper type jumbo frets on there. It will destroy it, really, because it'll leave marks on the fingerboard which you cannot remove once you've got these big jumbo frets in. So anyone who wanted to try and restore it to how it left Fullerton would find it difficult removing these marks. And although it'll give you a bit more sustain, it'll probably not help any other aspect of the instrument at all. So if you are going to refret your vintage Fender or your vintage Gibson, try and replace it with frets which were on there originally when it came from the factory, and that way you will preserve its value a lot more. We've seen a few guitars, I've seen bursts which have got enormous frets on, and they just look hideous, and they're not in keeping with the original guitar's soul in some ways. So please, if you're going to refret it, do it sympathetically. The other question which we were asked in this one was to do with neck repairs. Now, neck repairs are generally avoided. If you're looking for a guitar from a collector's perspective, it will devalue it quite a bit, probably by at least a third. And if you are going to buy a guitar with a neck repair, then you're looking at more like a player's instrument. That being said, there's nothing wrong with them. Certainly with Gibson guitars, and most of the neck repairs we see are on Gibsons, there is a vulnerable point on the back of the headstock, which usually breaks in a V-type pattern. And once it's been repaired professionally, then it usually is stronger than the actual wood itself, if it's done by someone who knows what they're doing. The ones which I would tend to avoid are the ones which have been done with dowels and lots of epoxy, because looks are quite important, and if the repair looks ugly, then it won't help the value of the guitar at all. But from a player's perspective, fine, you'll get a good bargain priced instrument, which won't affect the playability or the sound at all. But from a collector's perspective, then it will devalue it by at least a third. So I hope that answers the questions. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you can, and give us a thumbs up if you like this. If you have any other questions, then just leave a comment below, or send us a message on Instagram, on Facebook, or even send us a message through email. Okay, thank you.